Welcome back to the deep dive. You guys have sent in a really interesting collection of articles this time around, and they all seem to be pointing to a pretty fundamental shift going on in the tech world right now. Like AI is changing the game, making it possible for people without, like hardcore traditional tech backgrounds to actually step up and make meaningful contributions to the tech space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the central question that really jumps out from all of these sources that you've sent in is, can individuals who haven't necessarily spent years in, a computer science program or gotten those traditional tech credentials, can they really step up and be effective tech contributors just by tapping into these powerful AI tools that are emerging? And I think what's so fascinating is that there's this resounding yes coming from almost all of the articles, and it's pretty compelling. So I think that's where we're going to dive in today.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I mean, what we're really aiming to do with this deep dive is kind of distill, the most important takeaways from everything that you've shared and try to really grasp the significance of this change. Because I think it really does feel like we're kind of on the cusp of, well, it feels like a really big change, honestly. And we want to make sure that listening out there have a clear understanding of what that looks like and what it could mean for you.
Yeah, and it's, at its heart, a lot of these articles are pointing to this key idea that AI is becoming a powerful translator between human ideas and the technical execution that's needed to actually make those ideas real.
Okay, so let's unpack this AI as a translator idea a little bit. I
Right.
think one of the places where this is most immediately obvious is in coding itself, right? I mean, a lot of these articles are talking about coding without knowing code, which honestly almost sounds a little too good to be true.
Right, it does. But it's becoming a reality very, very quickly. So think about tools like ChatGPT, GitHub Copilot, or Replit Ghostwriter.
Hmm.
These are AI tools that allow you to literally describe in plain English what you want a piece of software to do, and then it will generate the actual code for you. It's like having this incredibly skilled interpreter, who understands your instructions perfectly and then can translate that into code, like a language that maybe you don't even speak.
Yeah, that's really interesting to think about coding in that way. I mean, how reliable is the code that's actually being produced by these tools? And, we're not just talking about generating like snippets of code here. Some of these platforms that are mentioned, like Glide, Bubble, Pinecone, Buildbox, they seem to be taking this even further into the realm of, what's called no-code development.
Precisely. So these platforms actually offer visual interfaces, often with drag and drop functionality, and they allow you to build entire applications, even games, without ever writing a traditional line of code. You're basically assembling these pre-built components and defining how they behave through these very intuitive actions. And some of these platforms, like Glide, are particularly well suited for, quickly building mobile-first apps from spreadsheets, and then others, like Bubble, offer a much greater degree of flexibility and customization. So you can create these really complex web applications, although they might have a slightly steeper learning curve.
I thought there was a really compelling example in one of the sources that talked about, let's say you wanted to make a simple calorie counting web app. And, the idea that you could just describe the logic of how you want it to, keep track of the calories and kind of like the design, the layout that you wanted to see. And that AI could essentially take that, handle all the coding, the visual layout, everything, even get it like ready to be used online. I mean, that's pretty mind-blowing to me, especially if you're someone who's always had these ideas but never really had, the technical chops to get it done. I know I've had ideas, sitting around in my head for years that I've never been able to build, because I don't know how to code. So it's exciting to think that this stuff might actually be within reach now.
Yeah, and it really does lower that barrier to entry. It really makes it much more accessible. And this isn't just limited to building apps, right? So a lot of the sources are also exploring how AI is transforming, what's called data work without a data science degree. And this also feels really revolutionary.
Yeah, totally. I mean, for so long, like working with data seemed like this, highly specialized domain. Like you needed to have, super deep statistical knowledge, all these like complex tools like Python or R, But it seems like now AI is really opening that up, making it accessible to a much wider group of people.
Exactly, exactly. So tools like ChatGPT, Power BI, AI, and there's even this feature within ChatGPT called advanced data analysis. And these tools can actually take data that you might already have in spreadsheets, something that most people are generally familiar with, and then perform, these really sophisticated tasks on it, like cleaning up the data,
Yeah.
finding those hidden patterns within it, even creating cool visualizations. You can ask it questions, literally in natural language, like show me the sales trends over the last quarter, and it'll go and generate all these charts and insights for you.
And it goes even beyond just understanding past data, doesn't it?
Hmm.
I mean, they were talking about, auto ML platforms. These are coming from companies like Google and Azure, and even, standalone tools like Data Robot. They can actually build these predictive models without you having to write any machine learning code. And machine learning code is basically, that specialized code that you need to write to create AI models.
Yeah, absolutely. So to use the example from the sources, you could upload, a CSV file of your customer orders and just ask the AI to basically figure out like which customers are most likely to stop using your services.
Mhm.
The AI handles all that complex stuff, the algorithms and the training of the model behind the scenes.
Right. So it's taking this, incredibly powerful stuff like analytical capabilities and making it so much more accessible. And it's not just, building stuff for understanding data either, right? I mean, even areas like software testing, which always seems so technical, so detail oriented, like you had to have this really specific knowledge to get it right. Even that is being impacted by AI.
Yeah, indeed. So several of the articles actually highlight this concept of testing without QA background, which might sound surprising to a lot of people. But AI test generation tools like Testim, Reflect.run, Catalan, these are really changing the landscape. So they can automatically generate test scripts, either based on descriptions of what needs to be tested, or even just by observing how a user interacts with the application.
So instead of having to write like, lines and lines of code to test a login form, they could potentially just, ask ChatGPT, write test cases for a login form, and it would just give them like usable test code back.
Precisely. Yeah. So it streamlines that whole testing process dramatically. It allows individuals who, they understand what the software is supposed to do, but they don't necessarily have that deep testing expertise to still contribute to, ensuring that the software works as it should.
And one of the things I thought was really interesting too is this concept of learning while doing, which comes up in several of the pieces. So it's not just about, AI doing the work for you. It's also about how interacting with these AI tools can actually help you learn and understand the underlying technical concepts.
Exactly. That's a really crucial point. So when AI generates code or it explains a complex data analysis, it's actually providing this really valuable opportunity for the user to sort of start to grasp, those fundamental principles. You can literally ask the AI, like, what does this piece of code do? Or how can
Yeah.
I make this better? And you'll get back, really clear, often simplified explanations. It's like having, this on-demand tutor, right, that's guiding you through these technical concepts as you work.
So it's not, a total replacement for having those technical skills.
Hmm.
And of course, the articles do bring up, what they call the catch, right? Because there are still some things that, that a human brings to the table that are really crucial.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, AI, as powerful as it is, and as much as it's becoming this like, incredible co-pilot, it can't replace things like, that natural human curiosity, that inherent drive to understand things, the ability to clearly define what it is you're actually trying to achieve, and also just like good old common sense, right? You still need to have a vision for what you're building, and you need to be able to ask the right questions to guide the AI effectively. And critically, you also need to be able to look at the results, critically and kind of recognize when something maybe doesn't seem right, or maybe it needs to be adjusted or tweaked in some way.
Right. That makes sense. So, practically speaking, what exactly can someone with, that deep technical background, what can they actually do in this kind of new landscape? Because the sources do get really specific about this and offer some interesting examples.
They do. So, for instance, let's say you're not a coder, you don't know how to write code. You can now design the overall concept and the user experience of, let's say, an app or a website simply by describing it, just
Hmm.
using words. And then you can use these drag and drop interfaces to kind of fine tune, the user journey, like how a person would actually interact with your app and the overall flow. And in many cases, you can even export, production ready design assets, things that are, almost ready to go that you can then hand off to development teams, if you still need, some more complex coding done, it's almost like they can handle the blueprint and, do the interior design, even if they're not laying the bricks themselves.
Right, that's a great analogy, and, the sources also talk about how AI is, kind of changing and making specific tech roles, like actual traditional tech roles, more accessible to people without those traditional backgrounds. So, for example, let's talk about UI UX designers. This has always seemed like a very, both visually and technically skilled role. You need to understand, color, composition, but also kind of, how users interact with software.
Right. And there's definitely been that perception for sure. But now we're seeing AI tools emerging that can really help with that design process in some pretty amazing ways. So think about Figma, for example. It's a popular design tool, and there are now plugins powered by AI. And there are even standalone tools like Uzard, Penpot, Galileo AI that can actually generate entire UI layouts from simple text prompts. So imagine, like you just described, the kind of screen you want, the elements you want it to have, and the AI can generate initial design options. So someone who might not be technical but has a really good eye for design and kind of that intuition for how users would interact with things, they can now use these AI tools to quickly play around with design concepts and really focus on that user flow and the visual appeal, and then they can collaborate with developers, the people who do the actual coding to make it all work under the hood.
So really amazing for prototyping, right? And getting
Yeah.
those initial ideas out. And it doesn't even stop there. I mean, they talked about, tools like Chroma, Magician, Visily that can actually, suggest color palettes, font pairings, even potential user flows, like the way a user would actually move through an app or a website.
Exactly, yeah. So these tools can kind of, act as guides throughout that design process. They can offer suggestions based on these, established design principles and best practices, even if the user might not, have a deep understanding of all that stuff themselves.
Right. So moving on to another, very traditionally technical role, let's talk about software and system architects. So this has always seemed like, you need to be this really seasoned engineer, right? You have to have tons of experience to really design how the underlying structure of these complex software systems work.
You're absolutely right. And it has been the domain, traditionally, of those very experienced engineers. But AI is starting to play a role even in this really high level planning of systems. Tools like ChatGPT and Claude can actually help you think through the architecture of, a complex system. For example, maybe you're building a video upload service
Yeah.
and you want to make sure it can scale to handle millions of users. You can use AI to sort of map out the different components you might need and how they might interact.
And even the visualization of these complex systems is getting easier with AI, right? There are tools like Diagram AI or the Lucidchart AI assistant that can generate like, system diagrams from text descriptions.
Exactly. So what this means is that, someone who isn't necessarily a coder, what can they actually do in this context? They might not be writing the code for the different services, but they can use AI to outline how those different services should talk to each other, how they should be connected. They can map out workflows, they can define APIs, which are these like digital connectors that allow software to communicate, and they can even get a handle on the back-end logic with AI guidance, which allows them to collaborate much more effectively with, the tech leads and the developers, even if they don't have a coding background themselves.
Right. I mean, this feels like it could really help bridge that communication gap, right, that often
Yeah.
exists between like the business people and the engineers. So let's talk about product managers and business analysts. These are roles
Yeah.
that often require, both technical understanding and business acumen. So how is AI changing things for these folks?
Well, AI is giving them a really powerful set of tools. For example, think about using ChatGPT to help you generate user stories, like those descriptions of how users would interact with your product, or even to draft those initial Jira tickets, to track tasks and bugs. And then there are tools like Notion AI, Whimsical, and Trello with AI integrations that can help with planning projects and visualizing workflows. And, capturing insights from meetings is huge, right? Tools like TLDV, Fireflies, and Otter.ai, they're AI powered and they're becoming really invaluable for taking notes and then identifying, those key takeaways from meetings, which can be really time consuming if you're doing it manually.
Right. So you're saying that like a non-technical product manager or a business analyst,
Yeah.
could use AI to help them write, better specs and roadmaps, analyze user feedback and market data to see what's trending, and even create mock-ups and presentations using AI-powered visual and content creation tools.
Exactly. It frees them up to really focus on the strategic aspects of their roles and kind of lets the AI handle some of that more, detail-oriented, time-consuming, but necessary stuff.
So this is all really pointing to Like, a really interesting shift in who can participate and contribute to the tech world, right?
Yeah.
And then there's this really interesting kind of brand new role that emerges, which is mentioned in a couple of the sources, the prompt engineer or AI wrangler. And this was so interesting to me because it's literally described as a non-code role. Like, you don't need to know how to write traditional code to do this job.
Yeah, and it really is a fascinating new role. It's all about understanding how to effectively communicate with AI models to get the results that you want. So the real skill here is in crafting those effective prompts, which are basically the instructions that you give to the AI, and then figuring out how to connect or chain together different AI workflows using tools like Zapier, which can connect to OpenAI, LangChain, or AutoGPT to really create some powerful automated systems.
And it's not all, like command line interfaces and complex coding for these roles either, right? I mean, they even talk about some visual tools like Flowise and Dust.tt.
Yeah, absolutely. These platforms are offering really intuitive visual interfaces, almost like, building with blocks, to help you create complex AI-powered workflows. So if you're a non-technical person, what can you do as a prompt engineer? You can build like intelligent bots to automate tasks just by describing what you want them to do. You can even train and refine AI models using just natural language instructions and connect different APIs without needing to write any backend code. Is there a risk that this role becomes too reliant on understanding the kind of quirks of current AI models and could become obsolete if the underlying technology shifts significantly?
That's a really interesting point. And, while the specifics of, interacting with AI models will definitely evolve over time, as the tech gets better, I think that core skill of, being able to clearly define what you want to accomplish and understanding how to break down tasks, into something that an AI can understand, I think that's going to remain really valuable. It might require, you to keep learning and staying on top of things as the technology changes, but that core concept of, effectively communicating with AI, that's here to stay.
Definitely. It's almost like a new form of literacy is emerging, the ability to speak AI, so to speak.
Right. And it really feels like this is, democratizing automation and AI integration.
Hmm.
And then, of course, there's the rise of, what we call no-code developers, right? We touched on some of these platforms earlier, like Glide, Bubble. But what does this mean for people who don't have, that coding background?
Well, it means that they can now launch real businesses, like, fully functional businesses, without having to be coders. They can use tools like, as you said, Bubble, Glide, Adalo for building those apps. And then they can combine those with back-end platforms like Xano, Backendless, and automation tools like Zapier and Make. And all of this allows them to build marketplaces, CRMs, booking applications, almost anything you can imagine without having to write any traditional code.
So they can handle like
Yeah.
everything, right? From the user interface, like how it looks, to, the data structures underneath, and even connect to things like payment gateways, all through drag and drop interfaces and natural language prompts.
Exactly. And the really exciting thing about this is that it's empowering people with domain expertise, right? So people who really understand a specific problem or specific market and who have that entrepreneurial drive, it's empowering them to build and launch their ideas without being held back by this lack of, traditional coding skills. And this isn't just about, making those simpler apps either. Think about domain experts in, healthcare, education, finance, people who deeply understand the problems in their fields. They can now create solutions specifically tailored to those problems without needing to like translate their vision through layers of, technical interpreters.
Right, right. And it feels like, the articles were kind of hinting at the fact that this trend isn't limited to just these roles. Like, AI is starting to make other traditionally tech-heavy roles more accessible as well.
Right. And that's kind of the overarching theme here. AI isn't necessarily about replacing, software developers and other tech professionals, but it's more about expanding the group of people who can actually participate in the tech economy and, build things and contribute.
So these new techies, right, they might not be writing lines of code, but they are going to be contributing in these really significant ways. Creating new applications, leading projects, coming up with, really innovative solutions to problems.
Absolutely. So the focus shifts from purely technical execution to the vision, to the problem solving, to really understanding the user needs and what they want. And AI can handle a lot of that technical heavy lifting, right? So this allows a lot more people to bring their unique skills and perspectives to the table.
So this has been a really fascinating deep dive. And, the sources that you sent in, they really do paint this picture of a tech landscape that is becoming so much more inclusive and so much more open to people, regardless of their background. So to summarize the key takeaway here from all of this, I think, is a resounding yes to that original question. Is AI actually democratizing tech?
Yeah.
Yes, it really is.
Yeah.
It's empowering people without that traditional technical background to really become these tech-enabled creators,
Yeah.
to build things that maybe they never thought they could build before.
Absolutely. I mean, AI is dramatically lowering that barrier to entry. But, as we talked about, your own vision, your drive to learn, your ability to ask the right questions, these things are all still crucial because ultimately AI is a tool. And like any tool, it's only as effective as the person who's using it.
Right. It feels like we're entering this era where the ability to think creatively, to really understand a problem, and to communicate effectively with these AI systems, that could be just as valuable, if not more valuable, than traditional coding skills in the future. And, building on that, I was thinking, beyond just, automating tasks, could this role of prompt engineer, the one we talked about, could it become, this crucial bridge between those really complex, technical AI models and everyday users, kind of shaping the way we interact with these increasingly sophisticated AI systems?
Hmm. That's a really interesting point, and I think it suggests this future where, we need a new kind of literacy, right? Like the ability to effectively talk to and communicate with artificial intelligence. And yeah, maybe these prompt engineers, they do become really key in unlocking the power of AI for the average person.
Totally, totally. I mean, AI really is turning creative thinkers, people who are experts in their fields, problem solvers, it's turning them into builders, regardless of their background in coding. And I think that's a pretty profound shift. And it has the potential to unleash, a wave of innovation from all these unexpected places, right?
Yeah.
Because now anyone can contribute.
Absolutely. And on that note, I think that brings us to, a final thought for all of you listening out there. How could your own unique skills and knowledge, combined with these powerful AI tools, how could that open up possibilities for you that maybe you haven't even considered yet in this really rapidly evolving world that we're living in?
Exactly. Think about it. How could your expertise be amplified by these new capabilities? So thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's been a really exciting one, and we'll catch you next time.